All right, folks, are you ready for the program now? With no further ado, I want to introduce to you Major General Ulysses Simpson Grant.
The innocent disciple was here tonight, and one of them told me be sure to turn it on. I don't know what he's talking about, but he showed me what to do to turn it on, and I did. Now, I expect that you expect that I will say great things tonight. I expect I will not. I am here. I got a terse telegram there in Clarksville, Tennessee, from Secretary of War Stanton. And Secretary of War Stanton said, the president directs me to tell you to report to Lexington, Kentucky at this hotel on this night, 25th of November. I telegraphed back and said, I can't leave. I am busy. And within minutes, the telegraph key began clicking, and it said from Secretary of War Stanton, I am to tell you again. The president says, report there. I telegraphed that and said, what am I to do? And the president came back, I think with the tone of the words even coming through the dots and the dashes. I think it was the president at the other end of the line. And he said, General, tell them about the war so far. And stand there and let them look at you. Both of which I found to be distasteful. But he said, nobody knows who you are. In fact, I have not met President Lincoln. We had only communicated through telegraph wires. But he said, nobody knows who you are, General. They don't recognize you. And I think that you might do great things. You've already won at Donaldson. And you're wanting to do more. So go down there and tell them what's happened. And he said, now, you know I'm from Kentucky. And I said, yes, sir, my replied. He said, so Jeff Davis. He's from Kentucky, too. So we've got the two men leading the opposite parts of the country in this great rebellion who are both from this great state. But he said, I want you to tell them about the war. And I said, all right, I will. I'll report. So I could do a little work, I brought my field desk with me. And that's what I've got done, a little work. But as I stand before you, I want you to know that being a major general, and by definition of Congress, a gentleman, I've got more sense than stand here in this august body with my hat on my head. And I do it for a purpose. There's been a fellow that's wrote a letter home to, I think Ted Bowers, who said General Grant always wears his slouch hat low over his eyes, placed squarely upon his head, tilted neither to the left nor to the right. And that's why I'm standing here, so you can see me as my soldiers see me most of the time. Now, I do have two concessions. I'm wearing my frock coat. Normally, I eschew the frock coat. I wear a sack coat, private's blouse. I have no care or concern, no charms are held for me by the trappings of a uniform. And the other concession I've made is my cigar is not lit. Now, Julia, before I left, told me two things. She said, Liz, don't smoke that cigar. And it's one of those cigars I got at Donaldson. It's not very good. I'm hoping that if I am fortunate enough to rise in rank, that the cigars will get better. And she also said, Liz, take off your hat. and keep your hands out of your pockets. And I said, yes, dear. Yes, dear. And I did not address the last issue because I do keep my hands in my pockets. So I'll take away the cigar and take off the hat because somebody in here, I hope there are no journalists in here, because journalists have become, while they are necessary and the free press is necessary, journalists are a bane to us. You see, they seem to find out everything that we are going to do. Indeed, I get up every morning and I read several newspapers. I always have, but particularly since I've been involved in the war, I read several newspapers. And it has come to pass that I need to get up in the mornings and read what it is that I'm supposed to be doing that day. The press seems to be ahead of us. But I want to tell you about my involvement with the Duke of Kentucky, Hickman, Columbus, and Bishop Polk, who should have stayed a bishop, I think. Leonidas Polk, and I understand his family pronounces it Leonidas. And Gideon Pillow, I'll talk a little bit about him, very little, but I'll talk a little bit about him. And I want to tell you how it comes that I am here with you this night after the Battle of Fort Dawson. When I was able to get my commission on June the 15th of 61, Governor Richard Gates named me to be the Colonel Commanding in 21st Illinois of volunteers. And I was elated. I was concerned, greatly concerned, that I was not going to be able to get a commission. And the fellows of the 21st Illinois went to the governor and said, we wanted to dump Simon Good, who is our colonel that we've elected, and he said, well, who do you want? And they said, we want Captain Grant. And he said, no, I'm not falling into that. Now you tell me you want Captain Grant for me to appoint him. What I'm going to tell you is you hold that election and you tell me who you had elected, and I will appoint that man. I'm not going to get caught in the crossfire between we wanted him, no, we didn't. And they had the election, and every officer from the lowest lieutenant to the lieutenant colonel unanimously selected me to be named the colonel of the 21st Illinois. And I got into the war. Now, I was a colonel for 7 weeks. And then we were in near Quincy, Illinois. Then we moved down to Mexico, Missouri, chasing people that turned out to be Jeff Thompson, the swamp box of the Confederacy. I called him that, thinking about Francis Marion. I understand he's still very proud of that. We finally caught him about 64, but nothing coming to any consequence. And my chaplain, one morning in camp, came running across the camp there in Mexico, Missouri. And he was waving a paper. It was a Missouri Democrat, July 31st. And he said, General, I said, Colonel. He said, no, General, you're a general. You've been named a general. And I looked at the column, and there were 4 generals. So I think John McClernand was another one of the 4, but my name was the first in the list, which if you're not in the military, that means a great deal because I ranked. Well, I had no knowledge of it. Nobody told me the president had nominated me to be a general, brigadier general. And the reason that he was nominating so many generals is that the Army was exploding. You see, when the Confederates fired on Fort Sumter, the entire United States Army was only 16,500 officers and men, 15,000 men, 1,500 officers, and almost all of them were up in the Pacific Northwest fighting Indians or keeping the 49ers under control. The enlistments came so fast that they averaged 1,000 men a day. And there were no middle management officers, brigadier generals, French word brigade, about 4,000 men. There were no middle management. So the president began appointing brigadier generals right and left. I think that he ultimately appointed 178 political generals, most of them with no military experience at all. And he needed brigadier generals, and I had 15 years in the Army, West Point graduate, combat veteran, decorated twice or promoted for bravery twice in the Mexican War, and so forth and so on. So I felt I legitimately got that brigadier general rank. And then I'm promptly replaced in command because they didn't know what to do with me. John Fremont, the great pathfinder, is in St. Louis. And he didn't really know what to do with me because I was ranking other officers. So when I went to St. Louis to talk to Fremont, he put me in command of the southeastern Missouri and southern Illinois district. And I found myself, I reported there on September the 2nd of 61, and I was in civilian attire, a beat-up hat, and as I recall, it was a black suit of sorts, because I just got a brand new colonel's uniform, and I was promoted to brigadier general. So I gave my new colonel's uniform to another man who was a colonel who did not have a uniform, and I went to Cairo, Illinois, and reported in civilian garb. And the headquarters was in a two-story bank building that had been taken over, first floor, by the Army. And Richard Oglesby, Colonel Oglesby, later General Oglesby, was in command. And I walked in and told him who I was. A lot of buzz or conversation. It was a lot of people making complaints and asking for favors. There didn't seem to be any middle ground. And I told Colonel Oglesby, I'm General Grant, and I'm here to take command. And I'm thinking you didn't hear what I said, because he ignored me. And when I reached across him, I waited a few minutes, and I reached across him and got a piece of paper and wrote the order assuming command of that district and gave it to him. His eyes went up like window shades, and he seemed like he didn't really believe I was who I said I was. But no matter, he was ready to turn over command, and I took command. I've been there for a couple of days, and on September the 5th, Mr. Arnault was brought to me. And that signal he was brought to me. And it turned out that Mr. Arnault, Charles D. Arnault, was a spy. Told me he was a spy. And he was convincing. I took him to be a spy. And he said, you've got to do something, because Leonidas Polk is in Columbus, Kentucky, and he's marching on Paducah to take Paducah. Now, that raised a couple of issues with me, because first of all, you should know, I'm sure you do, that Kentucky was trying to stay neutral. You know, Kentucky's one of the border states, Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland, Delaware. And Kentucky, even though Governor Maria McGoffin was pro-Confederate, Kentucky had not left the Union. And President Lincoln is most anxious to keep Kentucky in the Union for multiple reasons. Just one of them I will tell you is that Kentucky not joining the Confederacy cost the Confederacy 40 to 50,000 men that were military eligible that the Confederacy would have drafted. But they did not get those men because Kentucky stayed in the Union. But Leonidas Polk and Gideon Pillow decided in August of 61 to march into Kentucky, to Hickman, Kentucky. Now, I don't know, it remains to be seen, so I must say at this time, I don't know if that's going to be one of the worst mistake that the Confederate military made in the war. There's much war left to be fought, yeah, here after Donelson. But I believe if that's not lately considered the worst mistake the Confederacy made, it's going to be one of them. Because once Leonidas Polk marched his troops into Kentucky soil, and took Hickman, Kentucky, he completely changed the axis of the war. And he did this without not only the permission of Jeff Davis, without the knowledge of Jeff Davis for the Confederate Congress. And then he goes up and takes Columbus, Kentucky. So he had changed the neutrality of Kentucky and what we were going to do. Now, me being in southeastern Missouri and southern Illinois, we felt at the time, sincerely believed, that the war was going to be fought in Missouri. But with Hoke and Killer coming in Hickman and Columbus, that whole, as I said, axis shifted more to the east. And I was thinking, I've been studying those maps since I've been a colonel. And now this is September the 2nd. I've been a colonel for about a month. And I knew, in fact, I even had red arrows marked on the maps that I was poring over with the rivers of the Ohio, the Mississippi, the Tennessee, the Cumberland, and knew that we had to have control of those rivers if we were going to win the war. So when D'Arnaud, the spy, tells me that Pope is moving on Paducah, there where the Tennessee flows into the Ohio, and just about 10 miles north is Smithland, Kentucky, where the Cumberland flows into the Ohio, and then just 45 miles south of Paducah, where I was sitting in that first floor of that bank building, where the Ohio and the Mississippi meet. So within 50 miles, the nexus of three of the great rivers of the southeastern United States and the war all were together. And if Leonidas Polk could take Paducah, the Confederacy would have control of two of those rivers, and it wouldn't take much to come down and get control there in Cairo. So I decided to move. Now, I've been under orders, generally don't bring on an engagement. It's shaped me greatly because I do not like sitting and waiting. I like to attack. Khomeini, the great philosopher, militarist, said that time not well used accrues benefits to the enemy that he did not earn. Time not well used accrues benefits to the enemy that he did not earn. So I wasn't going to wait. I did send a telegram to General Fremont and said it was 6:30, 6:30 at that time, and I said, I'm going to move on Paducah tonight to take it tomorrow. If I don't hear anything from you, then I'm going to make that attack. And I didn't hear anything from him. So I rounded up 3 boats, took a couple of regiments, detachment of cavalry, I think it was 4 guns, loaded about 3,000 men on those transports, and moved up to Paducah, Kentucky, pulled over, heaved to there, and waited till daylight, and we marched into Paducah, and I also took 2 vans. Now, you may not know, there's probably much about me that you do not know, but one of the things about me that might interest you is I am totally tone deaf. I can't stand music. It's all noise to me, particularly military music. It's really noise to me. But I brought 2 bandits, and I marched them off those boats with the troops, and I told them, play as loudly as you possibly can and play patriotic tunes. Let them know who is here. They're expecting Pope and 3,500, 4,000 troops. You let them know the United States Army is here. And we marched off those boats in Paducah down Market Street there, and we took command of Paducah, Kentucky. And everybody was out waving their handkerchiefs and waving at us with all the Confederate flags hanging from the windows. And by the time we get up the hill to Market Street, they realized it was not the uniform they were expecting. All the flags went in, all the shutters were pulled, all the hacky stopped waving. Now, they kept waving, but they just weren't holding up all 5 fingers. Now, I took Eliezer Payne, and I put him in command and returned. I was only in Paducah for a few hours. I did what I had to do, and I went back down to Cairo. Now, when I got to Cairo, and while I was there, I had sent a message to the Speaker of the House, Mr. Richard Buckner of the Kentucky House, and said, Confederate troops have marched on your soil, and we are here to protect your interests of the United States, and we will do more than what is necessary. And he passed it on to Governor McGuffin. And I also issued a statement to the people of Paducah that said, we're here to protect your interests. You may go about your daily business and affairs with no fears or concerns. We will not interfere with you in any way. I went back to Cairo. Now, when I got to Cairo, I had 2 telegrams waiting for me from General Fremont. One of them said, feel free to take Paducah if you feel you are able to do so. Well, that was good. I'd taken Paducah. The second one, though, was not so nice. It wrapped my knuckles. He said, you are not under any circumstances to communicate with the governmental leaders of any community. Those matters are to be left in the hands of the general commanding the district. Do you understand? And to that effect. And I said, yes, sir. I telegraphed, yes, sir, I understand. And I also found out that the note had been a while getting to me before I got back, because he sent the original, instead of sending it in cipher, he sent it in Hungarian. He had a Hungarian officer on his staff. And he thought, I think he thought, I didn't challenge him on it, but I think he thought apparently, if I send this in Hungarian, nobody's going to decipher it. And we had a bad time finding somebody who could read Hungarian. I don't know who did, but somebody did and interpreted it for me. That was the only message I ever got that was in Hungarian. And we then began to drill. And we drilled. And we drilled. From that September the 6th there at Paducah until early November. And I was petitioning, Fremont was replaced. He was replaced with General Halleck. In fact, he was quickly replaced and told to go back home and await orders by letter. So not only was he sent home, he was sent home and said, don't call us, we'll call you. Wait till you hear orders by letter, which it was a long time before he got it, and I don't think he's got any yet. And General Halleck came in, and Halleck was known as Old Brains, and he had a habit. He was always rubbing his elbows. We all, I guess, have a nervous habit, but Halleck, when he was thinking, would rub his elbows, and it became a joke throughout the Army that, his brains are in his elbows. But Halleck was in command. He was a millionaire in California. He was a graduate of West Point. Very talented engineer. Had resigned in 54, as did I, as did George McClellan, as did William Tecumseh Sherman. 54 was a year for a lot of West Point grad resignation. But Halleck had gone to California. He read law, became a lawyer, became a real estate lawyer, became a real estate investor. He wrote a book on real estate that I think is still used or referred to. He wrote a book on military tactics and strategies, although he had never commanded an army in the field. He came well-deserved by the nickname Old Brains, but he never commanded an army in the field. And he's now my commanding officer. Well, Fremont had sent, when he was still in command, in fact, when I got back from the diversion, I found it had been replaced. But he sent General Charles Ferguson Smith, who was now on my staff, who I had placed in command at Smithland, Kentucky, Charles Ferguson Smith, and myself. and we were to go down the Mississippi. I on the west side, Charles First and Smith, General Smith, down the east side to create a diversion, because up in middle Tennessee and western Kentucky, Buell, Don Carlos Buell is there, and the president's wanting him to move down into Tennessee and Kentucky. His headquarters were in Louisville. And so we're supposed to be doing diversions for him and making Polk think that we're going to take Columbus. Now, I had advocated taking Columbus back in September and were denied that. And of course, by November, 2 months later, Polk's got, I understand, 35, 40,000 troops there. Got something like 100, I hear numbers from 100 to 140 guns on the banks of the river. He got a chain all the way across the Mississippi with each link weighing, I think, 18 pounds apiece. He's got torpedoes all in the water to blow up boats that we might send down. He had hardened Columbus, Kentucky, where I felt it would take an army of biblical proportions to take it. So I wasn't interested at that time in going for Columbus, Kentucky. But Fremont has orders to create a diversion for Buell and for, I was not privy to what they were planning in Tennessee. So we go down both sides of the river and flopped and flailed around for a while. And then I saw an opportunity at Belmont. Now, Belmont, Missouri, it's it's not a town. It wasn't then. I think 2 or 3 farmhouses were there. But there was a Confederate camp, and it's right across the river from Columbus. On your side was river. On the Missouri side, you've got Belmont. And they had Camp Johnston there, and they were training to move into the interior of Missouri, because Sterling Price is moving up into Missouri to take Elfa. He took Lexington, Missouri. And I had sent Richard Oglesby with 3,000 soldiers into the interior of Missouri. Then I found out that Price is coming up. Earl Van Doren's over there with about 20,000 troops. So the armies are getting bigger over there. I got Oglesby going to the west in there with 3,000 men. And the rebels are sending troops down to the St. Francis River to come in behind Price and Oglesby and to entrap Oglesby. Well, I felt I should do something about that. It didn't go out under orders not to bring on an engagement. When I got to Belmont, the morning of November the 7th, I had about 3,000 trees, 4 vessels. And we rolled off those boats and went about 3 miles into Wakeman the River and attacked Camp Johnston. And I did that because I was tired of waiting, and my men were chafing. They drilled all they could drill. The charm of Army life and living in tents and camping had worn off. A lot of them were 90-day men. Their 90 days were about to expire, and I thought they needed to be blooded. So we went to take Belmont, Camp Johnston. And we did fairly well. When we got off the boat, though, I sent a regiment. It didn't the drive summer in memory, so the Mississippi was really low. We got off the boats. I sent a regiment down the riverbank where there were some depressions for ordinarily a current would flow and dig out sand. And I put them there where they had some cover as a guard against Confederate troops getting between us and the boats, which became a concern. And we marched on Camp Johnston. Confederates met us, gave a spirited fight, and we were able to prevail and push them back into Camp Johnston. When they got into camp, their will broke, and they ran into some trees a little distance off on the riverbank. My troops, it's one of the mistakes that I'd made that I learned. And this is a learn-on-the-job effort. I thought my troops were better disciplined. I certainly thought my officers were better disciplined. because as soon as the rebels ran and got out of sight in the trees and down that riverbank, my men, a lot of them just put their weapons down and started ransacking tents, hunting for trophies, hallooing, shouting, all for the Union. My officers were riding from one knot of soldiers to the other, delivering speeches about the flag and God and country and victory, and the Union will be held together, huzzah, huzzah, huzzah. And I was sitting my horse, the second one. First one then shot out from under me. So I had a horse shot out from under me. And Captain Lego, my aide, gave me his. I lost my saddle, had my name engraved on it, lost my gold pin, and Sergeant Joe Brenton with Joseph Brenton was with me. He lost his French surgical kit. If we have any physicians here tonight, you understand that great loss. He reports from Colonel Bragg. Yes, Colonel Bragg. Your cotton's very short. Thank you, Colonel BC. It is good to have good health, is it not? Thank you, Colonel Bragg. So I'm on my second horse. My officers have lost control. And the only thing that I did that worked was order my staff with me to set fire to the tents of the Confederate soldiers. And when that occurred, that got their attention. It also got the attention of General Polk sitting on the riverbank over there in Columbus. And he had not been firing those big guns that could fire 2 and 3 miles with accuracy at us, because as long as he thought that his men were involved with us and in the combat, he wasn't firing. Once he saw the tents being burned and he saw the troops of the riverbank, he put 2 and 2 together and opened fire on us. He also sent 2 boats across the river with 5 regiments coming. They were gray with troops from the gunnels to the top Texas deck, and set 2 more regiments up to where our boats were anchored. And those 2 regiments got off between us and the boats. So I've got these 5 over here, regiments, these 2 over here, not to mention the troops that were already there. And my troops went from chaos to panic. What are we going to do? What are we going to work? We got to surrender. Nothing to put the surrender. And I said, no. I had my Grenfell saddle, a Grenfell saddle at that time, and I had my hands on Frank's saddle. I said, you fought your way in. Now you're going to fight your way out. And that was apparently an idea that was novel to them. So I organized them into columns, log columns, and set at the double quick march, and we went at them like an arrow. The Confederates were astonished. They parted like a gate and some spirited combat, but we got back to our boats. And when I got to the boat, I rode my horse back to these without an escort. I learned don't ever go anywhere alone. But I rode and was checking on the wounded that we could get for the boat. We left most of our wounded there because we couldn't move them. And then I got back to the boat, and I remembered the regiment that I'd left down the river. I pounded saddle down there to tell them to get back to the boat, and when I got there, they weren't there. They skedaddled. And as soon as they saw what was happening, they went back to the boats. The colonel and I had some conversation about that after, but then I found myself, I'm the last man on the field, on my horse. I fortunately, I think fortunately, I had a private's infantry blouse or overcoat, greatcoat. So I slouched over, and there was a cornfield there that they'd harvested, but it was over my head, even on the horse. And I tried to meld in with the surroundings because I knew I was in a bad situation. And I rode my horse, just trotted into the cornfield, and an officer, it turned out to be Gideon Phillip, said, yonder's a Yankee, boys. Practice your marksmanship on him. And I was 50 yards away. Not one of them so much as raised a weapon. I knew that my ruse was failed. I put the spurs to my horse. He seemed to understand the urgency of the moment. Galloped to the riverbank. Got to the riverbank. The boats were casting off, and I yelled, "Cut the ropes with axes, get away from the shore." But the Belle of Memphis, the boat I was on, the captain recognized me. I appreciate that, Captain. And my horse, he did not start his engines. My horse seemed to appreciate, again, the criticality of the moment, and he went over the bank almost vertically and slid down. His haunches were even with my head. And he slid down that thing. Now, you horse people here, so you understand how difficult that was. And then the captain ran a gangplank out, a plank. And you understand how difficult it would be to get a horse to ride about 10 feet over a board over open water. But yet again, my horse seemed to understand the urgency of the moment. And he rode right on up. And then the Belle of Memphis got up steam and backed away. When I went up to the captain's cabins behind on the Texas deck, heard some desultory firing, and I was too charged I laid down on the sofa. I was too charged to lie down, so I got up and went outside to see what the popping was, and bullets hitting the bulkhead. Captain has told me it's a bulkhead, General, it's not a wall. And the bullets were hitting the bulkhead. So the rebels were firing down at us because the water was so low. We were out of range. I said, stop, cease fire. I went back into the captain's cabin to try to lie down once again. And for the sofa where I had lain had a bullet hole in the end of it where my head had been. And the bullet embedded in the foot of the sofa. So if I had not gotten up, I'd have taken a ball through the head. And we went back to Cairo. Now, I'm criticized because it accomplished nothing. I will tell you I disagree. First of all, the rebels did not send anybody in behind Richard Oglesby in that 3,000-man detachment. They did not get with Sterling Price, and his efforts in that area were stymied. And my men had a chance to see combat. They saw the elephant, and they saw deer. And when they got back on those boats, they were a different army. They were different men. They looked the elephant in the eye and felt themselves to be soldiers. So I wanted to do more, and we had to do another diversionary effort. And this time to help Buell again. General Smith is going to go up north of Paducah and Smithland, and I was going to go to the west of Paducah. And we did that. We floundered around and flopped around and staggered in ice and snow and mud for several days. But when we got back, Colonel Smith came to me and said, "Grant," now he could address me like that. He'd been my commandant of cadets when I was a cadet. He's one of the first officers I met in the Army. He's the one that told me my name had been changed. My name is Hiram Ulysses Grant. The representative who named me didn't know my name. He put Ulysses S. Grant. He didn't write Simpson. He put Ulysses S. Grant. Tom Hamer. He put Ulysses S. Grant because he had to appoint me. That day was his last day he was in office. So when I got to West Point, I found out the name's been changed. And I was okay with that for a while because my initials were HEG. And I can only imagine what upperclassmen would do with that for a nickname. So I thought, well, but I told Captain Smith he was about 62 inches tall, and he unfolded like a carpenter rule when he stood up. I'm 5'1", I weigh 117 pounds, and I'm someplace I don't want to be, and it's my first time really away from home, and I'm trying to tell this man what my name is. He settled the matter. He leaned over that table at me, looking straight down. He was so tall. He yelled at me. I'll spare you the histrionics and the volume. But he yelled at me, "Mr. Grant." And he pointed the long finger at that piece of paper and said, "The United States Army says your name is Ulysses S. Grant." And Ulysses S. Grant, by God, you are. Now, if your mother and father want to call you Hiram, they go down to the courthouse and change your name. Do I make myself clear? Abundantly, and I left. Thought you'd get it changed, but I didn't. So my graduation certificate reads Ulysses S. Grant. And I refer to that as my Army issue name. My nickname was Sam, which came from Uncle Sam Grant, United States Grant, and it's Sam now. So if our paths cross again, please call me Sam. I'll know that we have met. But Smith comes back to me, who's now under my command, because my brigadier commission was predated to his. He should have been the one in command. I always was very respectful of him as a mentor. But he comes back and says, Grant, I found a way we can do this. Fort Henry is right on the river, Tennessee River, and it's flooding. And Fort Hyman is on the bluff above it. Now, we can take that, and we can go take Fort Donelson. Well, I wanted to do that. Halleck didn't. And he rebuffed me, insulted me about it. But I went back to Cairo after having been embarrassed, and Andrew Foote is there, Flag Officer Foote. He also wanted to do this. And by the time I got back down to Cairo after meeting with Halleck and talked with Foote, we both sent telegrams again. Halleck's been hearing from several different sources about taking the Fort Henry and the Cumberland River and the Tennessee River with Cumberland River rather with Fort Donelson and Fort Henry on the Tennessee. And he approved it, and we moved on Fort Henry. But this time, I've got Andrew Hull Foote, 4 ironclads, poop turtles, and 3 timberclads, which are about 14 inches of boat, but that means nothing to a cannonball. And they were behind the 4 ironclads. Now, my plan was I was going to take about 15,000 men and get off on the side of the river there, the Kentucky side, and go around Fort Donelson while Foote attacked it from the water. So it would be a joint Army-Navy operation. One of the first joint operations that I know of. Admiral Foote, Flag Officer Foote, steamed up to the fort, took it in about an hour. And I think they had 17 guns, all before disabled. They were 18 inches deep, I understand, in the water. In fact, to take the surrender from Lloyd Tillman, they rowed a boat into the fort. About 10-acre fort. Tillman had sent his 3,000 men back to Fort Donelson. So I got Fort Donelson on February the 6th. Now, I learned something else not to do. I learned don't send your commanding officer a note that you're going to do something until you've done it. Because I said, we've taken Fort Henry. I'm going to take Fort Donelson on the 8th, 2 days later. Well, I could. Bad weather set in, and Flag Officer Foote had to send boats back to Cairo at Mound City for some repairs, and the 3 timberclads went down up the Tennessee, and went as far as Muscle Shoals, Alabama, burning bridges and just generally showing the Confederates that we're here, the Navy's here. So I had to wait till February the 12th to move on Donelson. I did. And we went in. I'd gone to Donelson actually on February the 9th with my staff. And I said, well, come on, we're going to take a look. It's only 12 miles separated, the 2 forts. And my staff was reluctant. They said, well, we're going to go in the danger. And I said, not at all. Gideon Fellow is in command, and if Gideon Fellow's in command, we can go right up to within a rifle shot of anything he's in command of and nothing to worry about, which we did. And got a good look at their situation. I was able to move on the 12th, and we invested Fort Donelson on the 12th. Now, on the way there, it was a beautiful day, beautiful sunny day, February the 12th. And my troops, which got all new coats and blankets and great coats, they thought this is summertime down south, wintertime down south. And they took off their coats and took off their blankets, and they know they didn't throw them on the side of the road. They were stagged to come back and get late. And older men and not so fit for duty were to watch them. We got to Donelson. We invested the fort on the 13th. Everything went smoothly except John McCarnett. Now he's Brigadier General John McClernand. No, he's still a brigadier. He got the Major General on the 25th of March. But McClernand, who's wanting to ride his horse in the White House when the war's open, was irritated, as he told me, with a battery in front of his emplacement. He had my right end, General Lew Wallace had my center, and Charles Ferguson Smith had the river side, so my line encircled the fort, about 100 acres in fort. And I said, don't bring on an engagement. So McClernand said this Maney's battery, I believe it was firing on him, said it irritated me. So he sent a force out to silence the battery. Well, there was a tantamount to taking a short pole and hitting a hornet's nest because it was in the center of the Confederate line, or close to it. And he very nearly got us sucked into a fight that at that time might not have been able to win. And that was my first experience with McClernand not following orders. Well, I was hoping that on the 14th that Flag Officer Foote was going to sail up to those water batteries and do the same thing Fort Donelson that he did to Fort Henry. But that was not the case. The gunners, they'd even brought, I understand, in gunners from other locations who were expert artillerists. They sighted in the river, the Cumberland River, which is not very wide. It's a lot like a bowl of 10 pins alley right there in front of the fort. And they were away. Foote didn't want to do it. I didn't know he didn't want to do it, but he telegraphed back to Secretary of the Navy, Wells and Gustavus Fox, Assistant Secretary, said, I'm not prepared for this. But he, being a good sailor, he followed orders and did as good a job as he could. About 12:30 in the afternoon, and I was sitting there on the bank of the river watching this because I knew he'll destroy the water batteries at Donelson's mine. In about 90 minutes, 3 of his 4 ironclads were completely disabled, more than about the same. The 3 timberclads, the Tyler, the Conestoga, and the Livingston, are damaged, and they're all going back downstream. And Foote withdrew. I knew then I've got to go into a siege. I was not happy about that. About 4 o'clock in the morning on the 15th, I got a message from Admiral Foote, Flag Officer Foote. He later became Admiral Foote. Come meet me, I'm wounded, because his pilot house had been destroyed with a shell that had killed his pilot, decapitated his pilot, and had severely injured him in the ankle and the foot. He couldn't come to me. I went to him. Now, when I left orders, don't bring on an engagement. But what did I not tell them? I didn't leave anybody in command. I went to see Foote, and while I was with Foote, he gave me a cigar with smoked cigar. He told me I'm going back to Mound City, going to take all my flotilla back. They need to be repaired. I implored him, don't do that. At least take one around the bend there of the Cumberland and just keep up steam so the Confederates see that you still got boats there. If you leave completely, it will be a great moral victory for them, and that would damage us greatly. Well, I got a messenger then. When I left the boat, he agreed. He'd leave one. When I got off his command boat, I've got a messenger who's white-faced. He said, the rebels have attacked us, and I fear all is lost. So I rode to the scene there where they had, for pillow, had hit McClernand, my right end. And they were trying to they did push him back, I recall, about a mile, to open up a road south to Nashville, to get up the Nashville road. And they did it. McClernand was smashed and rolled back. They did well holding up, but they were rolled back. And when I got, and he had been sending notes. He sent a note to Lew Wallace next to him, I need some help. And he sent a note to my headquarters, where my headquarters was dismissing anything McClernand had to say. And they didn't take any action when Lew Wallace asked for some help. And several messages were sent from McClernand. Finally, Wallace is watching this, and he took it on his own to slide a regiment in between Gideon Phillips' forces and McClernand and stops that arterial flow. And that was pretty much, there was a lull in the fight when I got there on Dudleyville. And I rode up to McClernand and Lew Wallace, and he's to be praised for what he did. He took an initiative, and even though he thought he might be disciplined for it. And the first thing that McClernand says to me after we saluted was he growled at me, and he said, "This army wants a head." And I said, "I expect it does, gentlemen. The ground that's been lost must be retaken." And then I talked to a soldier who told me the rebels are leading with full backpacks, and I realized they meant to lead, they weren't going back. And I told Colonel Webster, my chief of staff at the time, tell these men that were milling around, load their cartridge boxes. There were boxes of ammunition everywhere. They just didn't have anybody to take control of them. And I rode along those lines. I said, "Man, that ground must be retaken." They got some leadership. They got rearmed, and they had been whipped, and they wanted to revenge that. And they began to reform to go back at Pillow. Pillow had stopped fighting and gone back behind his lines. He'd opened the way that they had decided they were going to lead Buckner and Pillow and John Floyd. Pillow moves back. Buckner is liberty. Buckner, well, I can imagine what Buckner might have said to him, but essentially he said, "What are you doing?" And Pillow said, "Well, I'm supposed to open the way to the National Road. I've done that." "Well, what are you doing now?" "We're getting our guns and our wagons, and we want to go down the Nashville Road. We're going to get out." He apparently never thought that I was going to come back and fill the gap, which we did. I thought that they had probably brought men down to that in our right, their left. So I went back up past Lew Wallace's regular forces, and I got to Charles Ferguson Smith, and I said, "General Smith, you must take Fort Donelson." And he unfolded again, he's sitting under a tree, he slapped his knees, he said, "I'll do it." He got his men in second Iowa. I remember him yelling at them, "Get in line, take the caps off your weapons, fix bayonets, and follow me. I will lead you." He's well over 6 feet tall, had a white mustache, must have been long, because one of the troops from Iowa wrote a letter home and said, "I was losing heart until I saw General Smith in front of us with his mustache blowing back over his shoulder." And they charged, there were several other regiments too, it wasn't only the 2nd Iowa. They charged what turned out to be Buckner's lines, and he hadn't got back up to those lines yet. And they camped, they swept that night in Buckner's lines. The only thing that stopped them was darkness spell. About 4 o'clock in the morning, I was trying to sleep in that rope bed, the wooded Christmas house. And General Smith woke me up. He said, "Gramps, I have information for you. The rebels want commissioners to talk about surrender." And by this time I've gotten up, I'm sitting in that straight back chair in front of the fireplace, and you must understand the geography, the geometry of this scene. I'm sitting in front of a small fireplace, and Smith is up here, so I'm looking up at Smith. And I said, "Well, General, what do you think about that?" And he said, "Bah, no terms for the rebels, but unconditional surrender." I said, "That sounds good. Bring me pencil and paper." So he's the one that coined that term. And I said and I noticed that the request had been written by Simon Bolivar Buckner. Buckner was a year ahead of me at the academy. We were old, long-time friends. And I thought Pillow was in command. Well, he said just unchivalrous and unkind terms, et cetera, so forth. And I surrendered. Because I told him I proposed to move him, immediately move Finding Works. When I rode into the Dover Hotel, and the building is there unto this day, I rode into the Dover Hotel, and Lew Wallace was sitting there having cornbread and coffee with the Confederate leadership. See, he was another political general. He hadn't quite got in so far that he didn't understand a subordinate general does not go into the surrendering general before the commanding general gets there. And he stayed there while we had coffee at breakfast. Buckner was a little stiff at first, but he warmed up. And we got the initial conditions verbally agreed to. And I said, where is Floyd and where is Pillow? And he laughed. He said, well, they're gone. They skedaddled. They left last night. John Floyd surrendered command to Philo. Philo surrendered command to me, and I surrendered the troops. They both were anxious to get out of here because they thought that they were the two most wanted men in the Confederacy. And then I laughed. And I said, well, no. And in fact, if I caught Pillow, I'd let him go. He does us more good with you fellas than he would in a precinct town. So we took Donaldson. Now I would conclude with this, and that's where you find me today. I'm after Fort Donaldson. I don't know what goes into the, we'll hack it as we go into the teacher. A couple of things about that. I took an entire army out of the field in Serenity. I think about 14 to 15,000 men. And I had to think about it because they melted off into the darkness. You know, nobody caught an army before. It's like the dog chasing a wagon, and he caught it. You know, what does he do with it now that he's caught it? And I learned you put up some security around a perimeter. Bushrod Johnson was another brigadier general that was there who walked off into the darkness. Bedford Forrest escaped with about 1,000 men. And when Floyd stepped down from command, he went back to the Dover Hotel there at the Ribbon and took his Virginia regiment then with him, took several thousand men out with him. And the people I would think most chagrined would be those Mississippi soldiers that had come in on that boat. They just arrived. They disembarked the boat. The Virginians got on the boat, both sails. And they surrendered with Buckner, the Mississippians. Pillow was in such a hurry to get out, he rowed, canoed across the Cumberland River. But the Cumberland was a dagger in the heart of the South because it went directly into Nashville. And Nashville fell a couple of weeks later, some few days later. First Confederate capital fall was never regained. Tremendous moral victory for the Federal side. And became as it was, a tremendous staking depot for men and material. The Tennessee flows all the way, actually it goes all the way to Knoxville, 642 miles long. It comes, the White and the Holston Rivers come together in Knoxville, and it flows all the way to 642 miles. But at that time, you could go as far as Sheffield, Florence, Alabama. So it was a sword in the belly of the Confederacy from which they never recovered. So that brings me to where I am now when the president sent me here to spend this evening with you. And I said enough. Now what I would like to do is, if there are any questions, I shall be happy to entertain questions until our time completely goes out. And I'll repeat a question. Who would have a question? You don't have to ask a question. No one has a question they'd like to ask? Yes, sir.
Did you ever have contact with some of all the Booker Act?
After the war, now let me slip time here. Yes, I did. In 1885, when I was dying of throat cancer, Simon Bolivar Buckner, who had been a governor of Kentucky for a term, his wife had died, and he'd remarried, and I think his bride was, 23 years old. And Buckner was honeymooning at Niagara Falls. And of course, my illness was national news, and Buckner came and called on me. And by that time, I could no longer speak. But he spent an hour or longer with me, two old friends, And I was writing my questions and responses on, as I recall, blue slips of paper. And I'd give Buckner the paper and respond after he read it. And he kept those slips of paper. But Simon Bolivar Buckner is the last non-family member to see me alive at Mount McGregor in 1885. Who else would ask a question? Yes, sir.
Did you ever pay the money back that she owe you?
Did I ever pay the money back that I owed Simon? Well, I can make a little bit of correction. When I got back, this is in August of 1854, I had resigned from the Army. I'd made captain of regular Army, found out on April the 11th of 54 and sent a letter accepting the commission as captain, and I also sent a letter resigning from the Army. And they went to Jefferson Davis, who was the Secretary of War. And when I got to New York City, I stayed at the Astor House Hotel. Well, by this time, I'm broke. My passage from California around across the isthmus and so forth, and I was unable to get $1,000, $1,500 that was owed me by Sutler at West Point, and I had telegraphed it from New York I was coming to get my money. That may have been a mistake, because when I got to Westbourne, he'd skedaddled. So I go back to New York City, and I'm broke. I've completely run out of money. And the Astor House Hotel owners locked me out, seized my luggage. And I stepped out of the front porch of the hotel, and here comes Simon Buckner driving a buggy down the street. And I waved at him, and he pulled over, and his hail fellow well met. And he said, "Grant, what are you doing here?" And I told him, I said, "What are you doing here?" And he said, "I'm here on temporary duty." See, it's another irony in my life. A man who was able to help me when I needed it most was where he wouldn't otherwise have been, or he wouldn't ordinarily have been. And yet he was there, right when I needed him. I told him my situation. And he said, "Well, I know the fellow who owns the building." So he went in, he told the proprietor, "I know this man, he's good for his money." As soon as he telegraphed his parents in Covington, Kentucky, about this time, that they were living in Covington, "He'll pay you the money, and I'll stand behind it. You'll get your money. Let him have his luggage in his room." So I was able to get both. Then Buckner took me down, bought me lunch. I wired my parents, and within hours, the next day, I got the money to pay everybody concerned. So I met, at that time, Captain Buckner in New York City. And then when he was getting on the boats to go to the northern prison camps, I pulled him aside and I said, "I understand you're going to be away from your people. Do you need some money? My purse is yours." And he declined. He said, "Thank you, Grant. I'm okay." So no money actually changed hands, but he really helped me out of a very bad type. And I was able to fade him back. Although he did say my unconditional surrender was unchivalrous. But I told him I thought Pillow was in command. I know you signed the letter, but I was thinking Pillow was in command. So I thought I might be talking to Gideon Pillow. If I'd known I was talking to you, I might have phrased it differently. He said, "If I'd been in command, you wouldn't have gotten in here so easily." And I said, "If you'd been in command, I wouldn't have tried it the way I did." Who else has a question? Yes, sir.
Can you share your opinion about slavery?
That is beyond the scope of my talk. I will say only this. Slavery was an awful curse that should never have occurred. It's a blight on us. And the end of the war ended it. Beyond that, I should say no more. Who else has a question? I thought I saw another hand up. Yes, sir.
How's free is?
How close was I defeated Shiloh? Well, I didn't think I was close to defeat at all. I will give you my location. And I learned a couple of things at Shiloh, too. By the end of the day, on April the 6th, first day, if you now visit the battlefield, when you go into the battlefield, the road that you go into back to the cemetery and down to the landing, that is my last line of defense. We were standing just about with our boots in the Tennessee River. They had fought magnificently. After the battle, I wrote Julia and some other people. The Southerners fought with astonishing courage and skill. They hurled themselves, particularly on the first day, they hurled themselves at our positions with no apparent regard for their own safety or well-being. They fought, they were distinguished opponents and fought as well the next day. Shiloh for me, and I should follow, the second day was a reversal of the first. And in about the same time frame, we pushed him back to the log meeting house, which became the center of the line, about 2 miles out from the river, until I understand one of Beauregard's staff members turned to Beauregard and said, "General, do you not see our army much like a sugar cube that somebody's dropped a drop of water on it? It's holding its shape, but it's melting away. Do you not think it's time to withdraw?" And Beauregard said, "Yes, it is." Called him back. Let's fall back. And when they fell back, I sent Sherman down the next day on the 8th to probe and be sure that they were really retreating and not staging for a counterattack. And at Fallen Timbers, Sherman and Bedford Forrest were on the same field. So there was one time in the war when Sherman and Forrest faced each other on the same battlefield. Now I'm told that Forrest raised his revolver and pointed at Sherman and fired, and the hammer fell on the nickel chamber. Now that's a great story, even if it may not be true. That's a great story because I was told the same thing, that Sherman fired at Forrest. But Sherman came back to me and said that they are withdrawing. It is not staging for a counterattack. I learned at Shiloh to put up breastworks and dig trenches and always establish a defensive perimeter. I had no idea that Sidney Johnston was heavily in defending emplacement to come get me battle in the open. But Sidney Johnston had a different agenda. And he wanted to attack me when I had only 37,000 men on the field to his 44,000 before Don Carlos Buell could get to me and John Pope could get to me, and I was going to have an army of about 80,000 men to his 44,000. So he attacked, and they fought well. And I told my wife that this is going to be a long and bloody war. I used to be of the opinion that it was going to be one big fight and we all go home. 90 days type thinking. And Shiloh was fought 51 weeks in a war. War started on April the 12th, 61, and Shiloh's fought April the 6th of 62. Nobody had seen an Armageddon. Not on the American continent. 100,000 men over, I think, 30 square miles. Both sides had about 200 guns. The people in Jackson, Tennessee, 50 miles away, could feel the battle through the ground. And when the wind was blowing, they could hear it, 50 miles away. And I thought we will still prevail, though, because the South hit us with the best they had. If you look at the Southern Command roster, it was a who's who in American military history. They get us as with the most that they could get, 44,000 to my 37,000 the first day, and yet we were able to hold them. Only by the artists, but we were able to survive. And they hit us as hard as they could. I've never seen fighting like that. As I said, they hurled themselves at our positions with no apparent regard for their well-being. But yet, I thought we will win this war because we won at Shiloh. And as one philosopher, I think George W. Cable, said, the South never smiled at the Shiloh. I don't think anybody smiled at the Shiloh. There were 23,746 wounded and killed and missing in Shiloh. Now that's 500 more. 500 more in 36 hours at Shiloh. They were killed, wounded, and missing in all three of the wars that we've been in. Independence, 1812, and the Mexican War. In those three wars combined, over about 12 years altogether, there were 23,200. 23,200. Total. Shiloh was 23,746. No one had any concept of what we'd gotten into. And the fire eaters and the abolitionists, and the two tails of the continuum. And it brought the country to its knees. People would say, my God, what have we done? What have we done? As I understand, there was one family, 40% of the families across this country, Atlantic and Pacific, Mexico to Canada, 40%, 4 out of 10 of every family in America had somebody killed or wounded in Shiloh. You see, because every man at that time, conscription hadn't started yet. The South started conscripting first because they had the need first. We had to start conscripting in 63 or thereabouts because these veterans were coming home with empty trouser legs and empty sleeves. And the fervor for war died away. And many men weren't coming home at all. And so enlistments had gone to nothing, and we too had to start conscripting. But Shiloh was fought. Every man that stepped on the field of Shiloh was there because he wanted to be there. Cause and country, patriotism, and principle. All volunteers, and that means that it encompassed every level, every strata of society, from the poorest to the wealthiest, from the man with no education to the man with the most education. They were all on that field together because they wanted to be there. So when that death toll, when those casualty lists came out, it cut a swath through the country that was not to be believed. As I said, the shadow of death fell across the country. And the weeping and the wailing, but it was too late. We were locked in war by then. As I said, I predicted that it would be a long and bloody war that would not come to an end until one side or the other, holding principles so dear as unto death, was going to have to yield those principles to the other side. And perhaps that will be the case. I can't tell now in February, March of 1862. Who else would have a question? The night's growing long. I see 1 and 2 and 3. And when they get you in that order, our time. Can we do those 3, Kent? Yes. Okay. First one back there? Yes.
Joe, do you care to respond to rumors that she had a claim that you over-advised you run the battlefield?
Well, there's no truth to that. That's a legend that's perpetrated by a very jealous professional officer corps who were a little raw about my promotion. See, I went from a colonel of volunteers in June of 61 to lieutenant general, the only one in the Army commanding 1 million men in 33 months. No other American officer has ever done that. colonel to lieutenant general, commanding general, the only one, 1,000,000 men in 33 months. So as I rocketed over these other fellows, it's a lot easier to tear down than to lift up. But that's a whole other thing. And I saw, I see you, one more over here. Yes, sir.
He's good. General, you had a hard scrabble upbringing. He started a lot. Is in the. You now general is a heart. What did you draw off that turned you like around?
And made it possible for you to be a successful on that.
What propelled me to become the systeman and after 7 years in the wilderness?
What you draw for the experience you went through?
I never gave up on myself. I knew what I was capable of doing, and I never gave up on myself. And that's the ethereal definition that I had to give you. One more, Susan.
You shared an invitation to go before theater that April 1865.
You think that if you had no this right, yes, sir.
Julia and I declined the invitation to attend the theater with President Lincoln that night at the Ford Theater. Do I think things might have been different had I gone? Yes, I do. If I had been with the president, I would have had a bodyguard. And that Mr. Booth would not have got past my bodyguard. So I'll be that brief, but there are two camps. Yes, it would have made a difference. No, it wouldn't have made a difference. I think it would have made a difference. Booth had a dagger and a one-shot derrick. He wouldn't, if I hadn't had a bodyguard, he wouldn't have got past me once he got into the presidential booth. So I think, and I regretted the rest of my life that I did not attend with the president that time. I must bring my evening with you to a close. It's been a pleasure to be with you and an honor to be with you.
Thank you. Bill.
My final word to you, join this roundtable. You are the future of our past. You are the future of our past. If you are not a member, join. This is one of the most, if not the most distinguished Civil War Roundtable in America. Be proud of what you have done. Be proud of the people who are here with you and among you. Support your history and join this roundtable. You have your orders.